The sun, an enemy with a memory, beat down on the neck of AKA. She moved not with the effortless, arcing gait of the later tall walkers, but with the rolling, determined stride of an ancestor caught between two worlds. Her feet, still designed to grip, trod the baked, cracked earth of the East African rift. The vast, open expanse, the Savannah, was a silent, lethal promise. She led the Red Earth clan. Behind her trudged 8 others. Odo, the elder male, his back a roadmap of old scars and weathered failures. 3 younger adults, lean and anxious, and 4 children, their thin cries a constant, dangerous thread pulled taut by hunger. Clutched in AKA's left arm was Teru, her infant, his face pressed against the familiar scent of her sweat and skin. They were migrating, but not by choice. The dense, wet forest that had sustained her ancestors was receding, choked off by a relentless climatic shift. The deep green was being replaced by a sea of hostile, waving gold. Sidalaras for dollar grasses, tough and unyielding. A biological fortress for the hoofed things and a death trap for those without fang or claw. AKA's eyes, shaded by a brow ridge heavy with ancestral necessity, scanned the horizon. The heat shimmered, blurring the distant, solitary acacia trees into mirages of hope. They had been without water for 2 days, surviving on the thin, pulpy moisture from the tubers Odo had dug with a sharpened stick. A meager, bitter ration. A flash of chaotic black against the gold-stopped AKA dead. Vultures, 100 paces to their left. A sudden, frantic descent. The feast had begun. This was the Savannah's cruel offer, a meal earned by a larger killer. AKA hesitated. The forest demanded caution and stealth. The Savannah demanded risk and speed. Staying meant starvation. Teru's cradle, she lowered Teru and placed him in the cradle of a thick, defensive tuft of grass. A swift glance met Odo's eyes. He understood. A distraction was needed. He moved the 3 older children into a tighter huddle and began a low, rhythmic, territorial hooting. A sound designed to assert presence and warn any casual observer that this small band, though weak, was clan. AKA and the 2 fittest young adults, a male named Kama and a female, Leia, moved low, fast, and silent toward the frenzy. The air, already thick with dust and heat, was suddenly laced with the metallic sweet smell of cooling blood. The vultures were settling around a carcass. A magnificent Gomphotherium calf, a victim of a larger predator, perhaps a Dinofelis, a massive, saber-toothed cat. The killer had fed deeply, ripped open the flanks, and then, likely sated, had retreated to shade. The problem was not the cat, but the scavengers currently feeding. A pair of enormous spotted hyenas, their jaws capable of crushing bone like nuts. AKA stopped at the edge of their scent line. This was the moment of primal choice. Retreat, and the clan starves. Advance, and they risk a confrontation they cannot win. She reached down and grasped the crude, sharp-edged river cobble she carried. Not a finely flaked tool, but a simple, effective hitter and chopper. She signaled Kama and Leia. Kama picked up a broken branch, heavy with dried wood. Leia picked up another cobble. Then they surged. The standoff with hyenas AKA's charge was not a hunt, but a desperate, primal bluff. She screamed, a high, piercing sound designed to mimic a larger, angrier primate, and hammered her stone against a dry skull fragment on the ground. Clang, clang, clang. The hyenas, surprised by the sudden noise and the brazen approach of these upright, noisy creatures, paused. Their natural instinct was to defend their prize. One, the larger, dropped its head, a guttural, rattling snarl escaping its throat, and took a menacing, loping step toward AKA. Kama, acting purely on instinct, ran a wide, frantic circle, kicking up a plume of red dust and screaming incoherent defiance. This broke the hyena's focus. It turned, momentarily confused by the dust and the 2-pronged assault. Ka didn't engage. She darted past the snapping jaws and hurled herself onto the carcass. Her only target was the deepest point of the kill, the untouched, nutrient-rich marrow encased within the thick bones, inaccessible to the hyena's teeth. She brought her cobble down, not on flesh, but on the femur. Crack, crack, took 3 desperate blows. The hyenas were now upon Kama, snarling and nipping. They didn't want to fight to the death. They wanted the meal. They were trying to herd the hominins away. Marrow extraction, aka ignored the frantic chaos. She jammed her fingers into the shattered bone, scooping out a handful of the white, precious fat and marrow. Brain food, pure energy to fuel the great shift in their lineage. She shoved it into the large, folded acacia leaf she had tucked into her waistband. Hooah! Ka cried, a low, urgent summons. It was time to run. Wounded retreat, they retreated not as defeated prey, but as daring thieves. They moved backward, never turning their backs completely to the hyenas, their hearts hammering a frantic rhythm against their ribs. The hyenas, confused but victorious, quickly returned to the steaming carcass. The clan had survived, but the cost was high. Kama had a deep, ragged scrape on his thigh. They had food, but they were exposed, injured, and still desperately thirsty. The clan regrouped in the thin, brittle shade of a fever tree. Aka divided the marrow, a single, oily lick for the young children, a small ration for the adults. The energy was immediate, cutting through the dull fog of dehydration. They could not stay. The scent of blood was a beacon. Aka knew that what the hyenas had abandoned, the larger cats would reclaim. They had to find water. Their new direction was dictated by the ancient, dry riverbed that snaked across the plain. Aka walked now with a new urgency, the scent of the marrow on her fingers a grim reminder of their new diet, the high-calorie fat of scavenged meat, a necessary fuel for the expanding brain, demanded by the receding forest. Impending storm, Oto, limping slightly, caught her eye and pointed, not to the riverbed, but to the sky. A new formation of clouds. Low, bruised purple, heavy with a promise that could be salvation or destruction. A sudden Savannah storm. They began to run. A clumsy, desperate sprint. The sun vanished behind the churning sky. The wind hit first. A hot, gritty blast, whipping the dry sand into a suffocating vortex. The children began to cry, clinging to their mother's legs. Scramble to shelter. They reached the low, cracked banks of the riverbed just as the first drops began to fall, huge, heavy splatters of liquid mud. The riverbed was their destination, but now it was a trap. A flash flood could turn the dust into a lethal, roaring torrent in moments. Aka saw the fissure, a deep, eroded cut into the bank, a cave-like overhang, just large enough to huddle the clan. They scrambled down, sheltering beneath the rocky lip. The storm broke with a brutal Wagnerian roar. The riverbed, moments before a symbol of drought, was now a channel for a brown, churning deluge. Huddled in the torrent, the clan huddled, soaked, shivering despite the air's residual heat, watching the torrent tear at the banks inches from their feet. Aka held Teru tight, the scent of rain-washed dust and wet earth a temporary comfort. The storm was a cleansing, a reprieve from the heat, and a source of life-giving water, which they caught in the largest, cupped leaves they could find. But the storm had brought more than water. The leopard's gaze. As the torrential rain began to thin, Aka saw it. On the far bank of the newly formed river, standing perfectly still, its sleek coat darkened by the rain, was a leopard. It was not stalking. It was waiting. It had been driven from its usual hunting ground by the flood and now saw the hominins, trapped and vulnerable, as an unexpected, easy meal. Its focus was absolute, predatory patience. The torrent was its accomplice, trapping the clan. The storm was their shield, muffling the sound of the approaching predator. Aka's blood turned cold. She knew the leopard's patience. It would wait for the clan to leave the shelter, to make the move across the drying plain, and then, with blinding speed, it would claim the weakest. But it was not moving. It was staring directly into the narrow crevice. It knew they were there. Oto, trembling, reached into the small, damp satchel of woven bark and grass he carried. He pulled out 2 crushed, pungent leaves, a medicinal bark he used to staunch small wounds. He silently pressed them into Kama's hand, gesturing toward the hyena-torn thigh. He was preparing for the worst. AKA stood up slowly, her shoulders brushing the damp ceiling of the overhang. She had to move the leopard, but not fight it. Fighting meant death. AKA's diversion, she took the two heaviest stones they had, the scavenge cobble and a heavier, flatter river stone. She waited until the moment the rain reduced to a light drizzle. She did not throw the stones at the leopard. She turned and threw them with all her strength into the deepest, darkest corner of the overhang, away from the leopard. Thud, crunch. The stones hit the rock wall and a dry, snapping branch hidden within. The leopard, a creature of forest ambush, was startled by the unexpected noise behind its prey. Its ears swiveled. It momentarily broke its intense focus on the overhang. It expected a threat from the open plain. That was the opening. Now! AKA's gesture was raw, desperate, and urgent. The race to the copy. She led the desperate scramble out of the flooded crevice and up the low, muddy bank. The ground was treacherous, slick with a thick veneer of red mud. Every footfall was a potential slip, a moment of vulnerability. They did not run for the open plain. They ran toward the only defensive position. A low, rocky copy, a small, rocky hillock, 150 paces away, crowned by a cluster of jagged, defensive boulders. The leopard, its predatory focus restored, was moving. It bounded across the newly shallow river, its immense paws barely disturbing the water. It covered half the distance in a few heartbeats, a fluid, unstoppable engine of muscle and tooth. The defining trial. Odo the Elder was the slowest. His limp betrayed him. He slipped, falling hard onto his side. Kama, injured but fueled by the high-calorie marrow, turned back instinctively. AKA's mind worked with the chilling speed of pure instinct. One moment of hesitation meant two deaths, Kama's and Odo's. She let out a piercing, distressed cry, a sound of absolute fear that echoed across the plains. Then, she stopped running, turned, and faced the leopard. She did not attack. She performed a suicidal decoy. AKA's sacrifice. The decoy AKA turned her back to the direction of the copy and began to run perpendicular to its path, drawing the leopard's attention away from the fallen elder and the escaping children. She ran like a panicked deer, feinting and weaving, her focus only on the distance between the predator and the rest of the clan. The leopard, faced with the easier, isolated prey, veered, focused on AKA. The hunter had abandoned its patient siege for the thrill of the chase. AKA ran until her lungs burned with fire. She ran until she was almost caught. She could hear the heavy, raspy breath of the cat close behind her. Then, she executed a flawless, sudden stop, pivoting hard on her bipedal feet, hurling the last of her heavy cobbles, not at the cat, but at a sharp, close rock. The sound was a sudden, metallic ping, a second, unexpected distraction. The leopard paused for the briefest fraction of a second, its muscles bunching for the final pounce. That fraction was all AKA needed. Into the thorns she dove, rolling hard into a dense, thorny acacia bush, disappearing into its painful, defensive embrace. The leopard, surprised and frustrated, clawed at the bush. It snarled, its tail lashing in fury, but it did not risk sinking its head into the thicket of thorns. The hominin was gone, swallowed by the brush. It knew a better, easier meal was waiting. It turned back toward the struggling clan. But the clan was no longer struggling. Unified defense on the copy Kama, though injured, had managed to drag Odo the last few paces to the base of the copy. The three young adults, galvanized by AKA's selfless, terrifying decoy, were ready. They were at the top of the rise, the jagged boulders their fortress. They did not flee. They stood their ground, screaming, hurling small stones and chunks of mud down the slope, acting as a unified, coordinated defense. The leopard, seeing the prey suddenly transform from panicked individuals into a unified, noisy, aggressive clan on high ground, hesitated. It was not a desperate meal. It was a battle. It was not worth the injury. With a final, disdainful hiss, the leopard turned and melted back into the tall grass. The clan was safe. Return of the hero AKA. Her skin crisscrossed with thin, bleeding lines from the thorns, crawled out of the bush and staggered toward the kopje. She was exhausted, a figure of mud and raw will, but she was alive. She reached the summit, collapsing into the huddle of her clan. The children, their fear replaced by awe and relief, did not cry. They simply pressed against her. As the last of the storm clouds parted, a weak, gold-orange sun bathed the plain. The scent of ozone and wet grass filled the air. Below them, the savannah lay quiet, chastened by the storm. Summit of Survival Otto, though battered, reached out a hand, not for AKA's comfort, but for the small, leaf-wrapped parcel of marrow she still clutched. He took the bundle, unwrapped it, and, without a word, broke it into small, equal portions. He handed the first piece not to AKA, the hero, but to Kama, the one who had turned back. It was an acknowledgement of unity, a silent promise of reciprocity. Then, he passed a portion to AKA, who gave the final, richest piece to Teru. The infant sucked greedily at the nutrient-rich fat, his small hands clutching his mother's thumb. The promise of tomorrow, they sat together, high above the world, a small, fragile circle of life against the immense, indifferent backdrop of a changing planet. The shared, hard-won meal, the product of scavenging, risk, and coordination, was a symbol of their future. They were not the strongest, fastest, or fiercest, but they were the most adaptable. The shrinking forest had taken their old way of life, but the expanding grassland had offered a new, dangerous one, demanding intelligence, courage, and, above all, the deep, primal unity of the clan. They were no longer mere forest dwellers. They were savannah survivors. The myth of the Red Earth clan had begun.